If you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or like the wounds from your past still hold you back, you're not alone. This space is for you. Here, we heal, we grow, and we rediscover who we truly are. Beyond the pain, beyond the past.
Feeling comes before the rational thought about it. So, you know, your body has that reaction before you're able to consider that, you know, this isn't your only community, or this isn't your family, or people that are sort of you're dependent on, and that kind of thing. So I think the feeling will always be there, and it's always difficult, isn't it? But then you can override that with what comes next. So it's not about never having that feeling. And I hate it when people kind of say online, you know, just stop caring what everybody thinks. And that is impossible, because you're built to care what people think of you. And you probably wouldn't function in a society that well if you didn't care what anybody thought of you. It's about how you then manage it. So when those thoughts come along about, you know, a negative comment, it's what do you do next with what comes up? So yeah, it's really about how you kind of respond to the thoughts that come up after. Yeah, so I mean, rejection is difficult for everybody, isn't it? But certainly if rejection taps into what we call a kind of core belief. So if someone grew up with a core belief around being unlovable, for example, because maybe their parents were inconsistent in their care, for example. So they you know, and you don't think about these beliefs consciously all the time. You know, they're not at the forefront of your thought processes, but they will influence how you feel, and they'll influence how you behave and the choices that you make. So what happens is when we have a core belief that is a sort of damaging one or detrimental one, we develop sort of rules for living around that help us to keep it at bay. So it might be, you know, if I can just be the perfect business owner and the perfect boyfriend and the perfect dad, then no one will reject me and everything will be okay. And so you set yourself these rules for living that if at some point, inevitably, you break, or there's signs that you're not going to be able to keep up with them. And what that does is when there's signs that you're not going to keep up with those rules for living, it kind of triggers that core belief to come to the forefront. And that's when you get that rush of kind of psychological distress, because it's a distressing thing to believe about yourself. And so that's when it can cause people real problems, when that sort of damaging core belief is being triggered on a regular basis, for example, maybe because it's a turbulent relationship or whatever the situation is. And that's when you can work not only on the present stuff, but on the core beliefs and looking at how those are playing out in relationships. There's a really fascinating therapy called CAT therapy, actually. So it's cognitive analytic therapy, just CAT for short. But that's just a fascinating therapy where it looks at the relationships that you have when you're younger. So when you're growing up with parents or siblings or family, and in those relationships, you learn how to behave in the world, right? You learn about, you know, who I am, what to expect from other people, and what to expect from the world at large. And then you develop kind of survival strategies or coping strategies for example, in a difficult relationship like that. You learn how to cope with that, and you have these kind of safety behaviors. And as you grow up, you're in a different situation, right? You're not dependent on parents and stuff like that. But those survival strategies or those safety behaviors continue, and they get played out in your adult relationships. And I just love that therapy. It's great for looking at the patterns and the cycles that people tend to feel stuck in their relationships, and how that reflects those early life experiences that are essentially outdated coping strategies. But it's really difficult. You know, if something's been a lifetime of habit, you can't just break that by telling yourself to do that. So it takes time and it takes practice, and you literally kind of map out the cycle so that you learn to sort of acknowledge it in hindsight, first of all. So you say, okay, last week that happened, and yeah, I went around the cycle. And then eventually you've done that enough that you start to recognize it when you're in it. So as you're about to do something, you think, hang on a minute, I know what this is predictable. I know what I'm doing. And in that moment, you then get this chance. This is the beauty of kind of awareness, is you then get this chance to choose whether you go with it. And sometimes you will, and you'll go around the cycle again. And sometimes you'll do this other thing that you've already worked out you need to do, and you break the cycle. and then you get the benefits of that. And so it's this really kind of long process of sometimes going around the cycle again, and then sometimes breaking it and finding this new life that you can create in your relationships and stuff like that. So, and it's incredible how life-changing that can be for people. I think thinking your way out of a bad mood is difficult and often takes quite a bit of practice around using specific skills and stuff like that. Sometimes the quickest way to impact on your mind is through your body. So things like exercise, music, using your voice, like singing and stuff like that. Things like that can create quite big shifts in the moment, but also human connection. So, for example, if you've been kind of pent up and tense, and then, or you felt unsafe, and then someone hugs you and you burst into tears, and it's that kind of shift of emotion. And so, things like human connection, movement, music, you can utilize those to good effect. Different people are different. And so, one thing will work for one person and something different will work for someone else. I don't know. My husband likes to listen to kind of really like old school New York hip hop and stuff, and that puts him in a great mood. It puts me in a terrible mood. I hate it. So it's kind of, that everyone has a different experience of things like music or exercise. But if you can understand your own experience, what works for you, then definitely then utilize those to create even small shifts in the moment, because a small shift can just change direction, and then other things can help to kind of move it forward. There are people who, when they experience emotion, it's quite unsafe for them because the coping strategies that they've had throughout life have been unsafe or dangerous ones. And so, we'll never kind of advise people to just, open the floodgates and allow everything in. It's very sort of careful, and there's a process of gearing people up with the tools. And I often talk to people about this when they're thinking about going to something like a trauma therapy, right? So while that involves going over the trauma, no decent therapist would ever get you to do that without first gearing you up with the tools to be able to cope with the emotion that comes up. So for anyone who feels like they, for example, kind of shut down emotionally and sort of block it out, you want to open up gradually to things and open up gradually to emotions that feel maybe less dangerous or less sort of overwhelming in small ways, in supported ways as well, so that you can manage it and it's not going to completely be overbearing. So, but I guess on a kind of day-to-day level, lots of people don't even recognize that they're blocking. They just recognize that whenever they've done something at work that's embarrassing and they feel awful, they just go home and crack open the fridge and they're just looking for anything. Or maybe it's go on Netflix for like 6 hours and block out the world, or gaming, or whatever it is. And so often it's hidden in the behavior. People will say, yeah, I'm fine with emotion, but I smoke 50 a day. And, it's a kind of, what,
that's so true.
What's the function of this and that and the other? And it's always about looking at it with curiosity, not judgment, but curiosity. Why am I doing that? What's the function of that? What's it doing for me? And often it'll be some level of safety around something that's uncomfortable. But it's really key that there's no judgment there, because it's something that we all do. It's human. And that's because our brains are so brilliant at taking over for us and doing something very quickly. It's okay to do that sometimes, right? We all do it because we're human. But what happens is a lot of people will come to therapy when they've lost touch with their values for some reason. Maybe life has sort of pulled them in a different direction, and they're not totally aware of that. They're just aware that everything just feels kind of meaningless, or I just feel lost and I'm not sure why I don't feel the way I want to. And often when we act based on how we want to feel now or how we don't want to feel now, that's that short-term stuff that will keep us stuck in the long term. Whereas if you act based on values, you can live a life of meaning. It won't always be comfortable, but it will mean something to you. Yeah, absolutely. Emotions get such a bad rap, don't they? Because they kind of, we talk about things like jealousy, and people say, I just could never get jealous because it's an awful emotion or something like that. And actually, the emotion isn't the thing to judge. The emotion is information. It's your brain's best guess at what might be going on around you. And your brain sometimes gets it right and sometimes gets it wrong. And it's your job to work that out. And so to look at emotion with curiosity, like, wow, I'm feeling really envious. What's that about? How can I work around this and work that out? And how do I want to then respond to that? How, if I look back on this really difficult moment in a year's time and I feel proud of how I dealt with it, how would I need to deal with it to feel that way? And not easy to do in the moment, because these moments happen quite quickly sometimes. And that's okay to make mistakes and then move on. That's probably a different subject, but the emotions get judged. But if we can look at emotions with curiosity instead, which is a lot of what happens in therapy, actually, is being able to notice whatever's in the room, sitting with it, looking at it with curiosity rather than judgment. Yeah, it causes people loads of problems when we think that the thoughts that pop into our heads say something about who we are, or that we chose them in some way, and that's where this whole kind of, there's a lot of stuff online, isn't there, about only positive vibes and only think positive thoughts, and if you do that, you're setting yourself up to feel like a failure, because it's not the way the human mind works, and thoughts will pop into your head, and that's your brain offering up ideas, opinions, judgments, narratives, memories, all that kind of thing. And it's what you do next with it, and that's where people can really struggle with intrusive thoughts, for example. So they'll have a thought that feels bizarre to them or feels aversive in some way, and then judge themselves for having had the thought and try desperately not to have it again. And when you try not to have a thought, you're already having it, because you think, don't think about whatever it is. And so, you're just setting yourself up to fail if you're trying to control what thoughts come into your head. But if you allow them all to be there, and then you choose consciously what to do with them next, or how much time to spend with each one, then yeah, it's closer to winning. If you want to start to feel better about yourself, essentially the best way to do that is through action and doing things that not kind of flood the system and make you feel really vulnerable, but something that feels a challenge but manageable. And then you get this little kind of step up, and there's something else that's a challenge and manageable, and you get this step up. But yeah, certainly with, words are powerful, but things like affirmation. So if someone already feels lovable and they read an affirmation that says I'm lovable, it'll probably make them feel quite good for a minute, and they can soak that in and enjoy that. And it'll be kind of short-lived impact. If someone doesn't believe that, if someone has core beliefs that they're not lovable and they're trying to repeat, I am lovable, it can almost be detrimental, because it sets up this internal argument where your mind also chips in with the reasons that you're not. And then you start kind of battling it out in terms of, well, but what about this? And what about that? And then you end up having, you're in turmoil. So it can have a detrimental effect if that person is genuinely really struggling with low self-esteem or low confidence and that kind of thing. So I think affirmations can be more helpful when they're instructional, when they're about, when this, do this, and it will help you get through this difficult situation. Like, sports people use them and stuff like that, to help them get through high pressure moments. But in terms of turning around core beliefs, probably not so much. So if that person is struggling with really high anxiety, that one thing that is very quick to teach that they can take away is something like a breathing exercise, because it's one of the quickest ways that we can, slow the anxiety response. So if you're anxious, your breathing will be fast and shallow. So kind of, and if you do that for long enough, you actually start to feel quite panicky. And that's because, your heart and your lungs are connected. So your heart's going to start pounding to get all that oxygen around your body, and you'll kind of start gearing up into action. So if you can slow your breathing down, you can slow the whole process down. You can, if you're out and about and you don't want anyone to really know what you're doing, if you're on a bus or at a meeting, pick something like a door or a window or something, This kind of box shape, and you start with the kind of bottom left corner, and as you kind of trace your eyes up to the top corner, you're just counting in as you breathe in, and it's maybe like 4 seconds. And then as you trace your eyes across the top, that will be a pause, so you're just holding a breath for 4 seconds, and then you come back down with an out breath of 4 seconds, and then hold. And so you're just kind of breathing in 4, hold 4, out 4, hold 4. So, and it's just one way of, when you're out, to give you a visual focus that can help you to just monitor, okay, and now I'm breathing in, now I'm breathing out. Because when you're really, really panicking, actually breathing slowly can feel really difficult to do. So you can use that kind of visual. But also more recently, some great research has been coming out about how to kind of, it's helpful to extend the out breath. So if you can, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are. If you can make that out breath longer and more vigorous than your in breath, then that's going to help calm that response fairly quickly.
Healing takes time, and you don't have to do it alone. If this message resonated with you, know that your journey matters. Be gentle with yourself. Keep exploring and surround yourself with support. Healing takes time, and before you go, comment, "I am healing to affirm your growth. You are seen, you are valued, and you are not alone." And before you go, comment, "I am healing to affirm